Hi, my name is Godswill Inyang, and I'd like to welcome you back to the Inyang Perspectives channel. Today, we're going to be discussing the topic of democracy and asking the question, why are people losing faith in democracy? The first recorded form of democracy took place in ancient Athens, where male citizens were allowed to partake in decision making in the ecclesia. In the ecclesia, public officials were elected by law in order to avoid the formation of oligarchies. It's worth noting, though, that this early form of democracy excluded women, slaves, and foreign residents. Later democratic developments brought in stuff like Magna Carta, which established that no man was above the law, including kings. The Magna Carta would go on to be used as the basis of many democratic evolutions, such as the American Constitution and the French Declaration of the Rights of Man. The women's suffrage movement led to women achieving voting rights in many Western countries during the early to mid 20th century, with New Zealand in particular adopting voting rights for women in 1893. Furthermore, following World War II, with the collapse of many empires and later in the 20th century, the collapse of many authoritarian regimes, many former colonies and former dictatorships adopted democratic processes. So the question is, why democracy? Whilst there were many smaller decisions that contributed to the Athenian choice in a democratic system, their choice in democracy can be boiled down to two main reasons. The first reason is to reduce political unrest. Political enfranchisement allowed lower class citizens to peacefully air their grievances. This was particularly significant because the Athenian navy at the time relied heavily on the lowest class of citizen, known as the Thetes. Furthermore, debt slavery was causing socio-economic turmoil in Athenian society, which created fear around the idea of a low-class rebellion. This is what we most commonly know as democracy today, the idea that democracy means power to the people. The second reason for a democratic system, which a lot of people don't realize in the modern day, was to prevent the development of an autocracy. In the past, Athens had experienced periods of autocracy, especially under the Pisistratiid family. The democratic system, they hoped, through its system of checks and balances, would prevent one man or one small group of people from holding all the power again. In the modern day, we often compare countries like the USA and UK to a country like China because China gets things done extremely efficiently. And the truth of the matter is, when it just comes to getting a job done, democracy isn't the most efficient system. In democracies, just to pass any type of legislation or any type of reform, politicians have to go through multiple hurdles, whether it's courts, whether it's other political parties. These simply aren't hurdles that exist in authoritarian regimes. In democracy, anytime legislation or reform needs to pass, politicians need to go through courts and through other political parties, which are hurdles that don't exist in authoritarian regimes. Fundamentally, this is what gives authoritarian regimes like China their luster. The idea that one man or one small group of people can come in and build as much infrastructure as needed or build many buildings as needed as quickly as needed is extremely attractive. In China, anything the government says goes. If the government wants a hospital built, it gets built. If they want a rail line built, it gets built. If they want a road built, it gets built. Because there's no one to oppose or say otherwise. Now, this isn't all purely down to democracy. Compared to countries like the USA and UK, China is a very collectivist society, which means decision making isn't seen as individual choice, but rather as a decision that will impact the society as a whole. And whilst demolishing a building or a farm to build a highway that will benefit society as a whole can be seen as something that's sometimes necessary, this is a power that can be easily abused. The truth is that authoritarian regimes are fantastic if the people at the top are good people and know what they're doing. In an authoritarian regime, even if you have one or two, maybe even three good leaders in a row, if there's no system of checks and balances or restrictions on their power, all it takes is one bad person getting into power, which they eventually will, to wreck the whole system. True democracy operates on the idea that eventually a bad person will get into power, and the system of checks and balances and other legal restrictions is there to prevent them from wrecking the whole system. A famous medieval example of a system of checks and balances being applied to a leader is the story of King John. In 1199, King John I inherited a bankrupt throne from his brother, Richard the Lionheart, and with that bankrupt throne, he had to protect his family's possessions in France. Over the course of his reign, King John would lose most of his family's possessions in France, In order to fund his failed reconquest of those lands, King John imposed heavy taxes and arbitrary fines on his nobility. In 1215, pushed to the brink of financial ruin, a coalition of barons formed a rebellion against King John, captured London, and forced King John to negotiate. The negotiations led to the signing of Magna Carta, which established that nobody, not even the king, was above the law, and led to legal rights such as habeas corpus. Unfortunately, right now, in many nations, the democratic process and faith in democracy is being eroded. Reason number one, I would say that faith in democracy is being lost is simply because people are tired of politicians lying to them. The political culture of lying or deceiving voters in order to gain the power is killing democracy slowly. Many people, both on the left of politics and on the right, feel that no matter who they vote for, nothing will change. As a result, many are beginning to see elections as useless. This is evident in the decreasing level of electoral participation and decreasing voter turnout. For example, in the last UK general election, only 60% of people who could vote did vote. The second reason I would say that people are losing faith in democracy is because of the high level of financial manipulation. High levels of income inequality and extreme wealth growth allow wealthy individuals and wealthy groups to influence government policy. Whether it's billionaire donations or state donations, when these wealthy groups and individuals donate to political parties, it leads to policy changes. A 2014 Cambridge report on American politics showed a graph that depicted that the percentage of Americans that are in favor of a policy has a minuscule difference on whether it gets passed or not. The graph showed that whether a minority or majority of Americans are in favor of a policy change, the probability of it happening is roughly the same, around 0.3. Whereas the study showed that when economic elites or interest groups are interested in a policy, the policy has a much higher probability of being passed. For example, the study showed that when there's a low level of support for a policy among the American economic elite, the policy only has an 18% chance of passing. On the other hand, when there's a high level of support, the policy has a 45% chance of passing. Interest groups had a similar result. For low support, policies had a 16% chance of passing, whilst for high support, policies had a 47% chance of passing. The third reason for why people are losing faith in democracy is what I would call political tribalism. More than ever, heavily thanks to social media and news outlets, people are divided online. Now, of course, in a democracy, there'll always be people with different opinions. The issue is people are less willing to peacefully debate and work it out and convince each other in a peaceful manner of their opinions. Thanks to social media and news outlets, more than ever, people are unwilling to peacefully debate or resolve issues online through respectful discourse. It doesn't help that people are stuck in echo chambers, so they're constantly hearing the same opinions over and over again with no alternative. So people just end up deluded and purely convinced in their own mindset. Now, whilst this is an issue that affects the whole Western world, I'd say this is more of an American issue. I'm sure we've all seen Americans in comment sections where you see people on the left insulting people on the right, and people on the right insulting people on the left, as if they can't just peacefully talk. Overall, a lack of political discourse, one, prevents people from being able to just compromise, and two, also means that people end up suppressing how they truly feel about a lot of issues, which can lead to greater issues down the line. It is worth noting though, that as time goes on, an increasingly high amount of people, whether in real life or online, do not have actual political opinions, and rather are just there to agitate. So I would advise us all, no matter what side of politics you're on, next time you see somebody trying to agitate a real life protest or trying to haul complete nonsense in a comment section, just ask yourself, does this person have an actual political opinion, or are they just here to stir up anger and resentment? My fourth and final reason on why people are losing faith in democracy is that in many countries, democracy never got the chance to properly settle in. For example, when Russia left the Soviet Union, the rapid economic collapse and disastrous privatization meant that power and wealth were quickly consolidated into the hands of a few oligarchs. Most ordinary Russians blamed the economic chaos, poverty, and their loss of superpower status on democracy and capitalism. Furthermore, in 1993, the power struggle between Boris Yeltsin and the Russian parliament over the direction of economic reforms led to the parliament trying to impeach him, at which point Yeltsin illegally dissolved the legislature. This standoff ended in October 1993 when Yeltsin ordered tanks to shell the Russian parliament, which killed over 100 people. After this, Yeltsin pushed through a new constitution that created a hyper-presidential system. This constitution stripped parliament of real power and consolidated it with the president. This meant that when Vladimir Putin took power in 2000, he didn't have to make a whole new constitution. He simply used the presidential powers that Yeltsin left him to remove any remaining opposition. This took place not just in Russia, but across Africa, as political and economic instability prevented nations such as Somalia, the Congo, Nigeria, and many other African nations from being able to properly democratize. To finish off the video, I'd just like to read out a quote from Cheryl Lee Ralph. Just because you have rights today does not mean that you will have rights tomorrow. Don't sit there in your happiness. Don't sit there in your privilege. Don't sit there looking so good thinking that you think the fight is over. The fight has just begun. It's more important than ever for us to be aware of and protect our political and human rights. As the quote goes, you don't know what you have until you lose it. Peace out.